And I really enjoy views in nature. You can ask some of my students, my English students, when I study Walden and nature, that I really enjoy nature. And I thought it was a very beautiful view, so I wanted a better view. And I wanted to really take advantage of the view. And so I saw a tree that was very close by, and I began climbing. And when I began climbing the tree, what began to happen was that I was about 10-15 feet up, and I heard someone say, try to go higher. So I went higher. I was about 20-25 feet up. 25 feet up, I stood upon a branch, and I tried to go across the next branch. And I realized it was too far, and I tried to hug the trunk, but it was too far for me to reach there. So then what happened was I thought to myself, if I stand up and I hold the branch above my head, I'll be able to cross over to the other branch easily. Now, I wasn't really aware that it had rained recently, and then so it was dry before that, and so the branches were dry and the rain made them seem stable. So I held on to the branch above my head and I tugged on it, and it seemed like it would hold. I took a step forward, and as I was stepping forward, the branch snapped. And one of my feet were already off the branch I was standing on, and so I was stepping forward and the branch above my head snapped, and I fell. And when I fell almost as if on the position that my hands and knees were on the ground. I fell 25 feet. And my wife, she heard the snap, and she heard, I guess, I let out a sound. And she turned around, she saw, because I was wearing white, a flash of white just fall to the ground. And as soon as I hit the ground, although I fell on my hands and my knees, the force was so great that I immediately broke my shoulder blade, and my stomach region, my abdomen region, hit the ground, and it hit an exposed root. Now, at that moment, I didn't know what was going on, and I remember my wife running over to me, and when she ran over to me, I turned to her, and she just saw I was just moaning. I was in so much pain. And I just remember immediately I started saying, I'm sorry. Because at that point, I knew that something bad had happened. Something had gone wrong. And I saw that my stomach, what I later found out was my hepatic artery, was torn off my liver, and all the blood began to just flow freely into my abdomen region, so my stomach began to grow. It was almost as if I was a pregnant woman. Just my stomach was growing more and more and more and more. And from a nearby pool, some of the lifeguards saw me, so they ran over. And when they ran over,
Are you okay?
they said, don't worry, we called the ambulance, they're on their way. But it took a very long time for the ambulance to arrive. And the entire time I remember thinking to myself that, I'm okay, I can go. And my wife was telling me to stay laying down. And I remember telling her, I'm really sorry, till the ambulance finally arrived. So as they were carrying me, I began to do istighfar and tawbah, and I began to beg Allah, oh Allah, forgive me, oh Allah, forgive me, oh Allah, forgive me. And as I was saying, begging Allah, forgive me, a voice came into my mind and began to say, Allah will never leave you. Allah will never leave you. It said this a few times until I sort of began to listen to the voice, and then the voice said, Allah would never leave you, or would He leave you? At that moment, it felt as if Shaitan was trying to get me at that moment, because it felt like I was passing away, get me to second guess Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I said, no, Allah will never leave me. And I continued to do tawbah and istighfar. And, the ambulance ride, I remember that clearly as well, because of that coffee I had in my stomach. I had to throw up, and the ambulance worker, he kept moving my body side to side because I said I had to work out. He would just tip the stretcher until I had to vomit, and I vomited everywhere. And they would stop at every light. My wife told me that they stopped at every light. Finally, when I got into the emergency room, they rushed me, and the doctor saw this was very serious right away. So I began begging the doctors, please, just knock me out. I need something to remove the pain. I remember I was begging them, and I was trying to be polite. I'm like, I'm sorry to ask, but I need you to knock me out. And they realized right away that this was dire, because they said, we can't knock you out. We need to see what's wrong first. The blood volume was getting to be too much. They actually went in through my leg, and they burned shut the hepatic artery. But the blood volume was getting to be too much. So the blood wasn't flowing anymore now, but it was still standing in my stomach, and it caused a lot of pressure on my lungs. The doctors had hoped that the blood would seep into the muscles and into the tissues, and then that it would go away from my abdomen, but it didn't. And soon, what was a bad situation became worse, and the blood began pushing up at my lungs, and my lungs collapsed. I actually coded, and I stopped breathing. The doctors ran in, they began to revive me, and they began to do whatever they had to do, and they decided immediately that they had to do surgery. It's going to be emergency surgery. Emergency surgery because it was too risky to let this continue. As my lungs collapsed, I actually remember a few things. One, I remember people were visiting me, because apparently it was a very big deal that something had happened, so people came down to visit me. And they came down in droves. There was large groups that came at a time. And I remember every person that came to me, I would beg them that I don't think I'm going to survive, please forgive me. And some of the people try to respond back and cheerfully, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, but I knew the situation was very dire. So I'd ask them, just please forgive me. Anything I've done wrong, just please forgive me. And I look back at it now, and you think that why does a person have to wait until that moment when they think they're going to die to ask for forgiveness? Wouldn't it have been a better life for that person, or for me in particular, to ask people for forgiveness and make amends while still alive? Once my lungs had collapsed, my parents were told by a doctor that it's going to be it's going to be exploratory surgery. In fact, my scar goes from like my sternum down to my waist, because they had to go in and see what's going on. The MRIs were sort of clear, but they just showed grade 4 and 5 lacerations of the liver, but there were a lot of things that were muddled. Things weren't clear there. They said we have to just go in and see what's wrong. At this point, I was actually urinating blood, and there were potentially other problems as well. So the doctors went in for surgery. They said it would be hours before they figure out what's going on. Within 45 minutes, the doctor came into the waiting room. Now my family was making a lot of dua and making a lot of prayer at this point, and they were begging Allah, and may Allah reward them. They were begging Allah, and at that moment the doctor walks in. Now, to think that doctor said it's going to be hours before the surgery ends and have him come in only 40-45 minutes into the surgery basically means that the surgery is unsuccessful. So my family immediately became very worried. But then the doctor had mentioned that alhamdulillah was a success. One of their fears of actually doing surgery was that they were afraid, because my stomach was completely ballooned up with all this blood inside, that if they cut into my stomach, it would be like putting a needle to a what's the word I'm looking for? Into a balloon, a water balloon. That if you put a needle to it, it will immediately explode. In that same way, they felt that if they cut my stomach, it would explode and blood would be everywhere, and they wouldn't be able to stop the bleeding. The doctor said when you cut my stomach open, they opened it up, all the blood remained congealed. It just stayed there in a dome shape. It didn't move. It didn't run away. It didn't flow away. This was a miracle. And then when they began to, so they had to clean the blood, and I don't know what else they had to do, but they had to treat the blood. When they went in to begin to fix my liver, what was initially grade 4 and 5 lacerations were now down to grade 3 lacerations. And there's only a small bruise in the pancreas, and even though I was urinating blood, the kidneys were fine. And now all these surgeries, all the exploration inside showed that work had already been done and things were already taken care of. And it's very interesting because when the surgeons went in to do their surgery, it seemed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already done a surgery in advance. Now what my mother told me something very interesting, and my wife mentioned this as well, that when I finally woke up, and they finally took me out of my coma, when I finally woke up, that I looked at everyone and I recognized everyone but my wife, except my wife. And my mom said that at that point I was still a child in my mental state, my psychological state. I recognized everyone except for my wife, and it was just very difficult for my wife, because I would look at everyone and I looked at her and I'm like, who's she? And I was really like a child. In the next few days I was getting older and older, and I would tell my mom that, Mom, let's go outside, let's play, I want to leave this hospital. A few days later my brother would come in, and I would grab my brother and say, be a man, and take me out of here. I'd tear out my IVs. And you know, that was probably when I was like 15, 16, I had an anger issue. But I was growing up to finally one day recognize my wife. But it was such a long, difficult, strenuous path, and there were so many lessons we learned from it. You know, I had to sort of learn to swallow again, because I hadn't swallowed for days, to sit up again, to walk again, all these things that we take for granted. And sometimes we should realize that these small things are such gifts from Allah Ta'ala. To be able to actually, I was so thirsty and they couldn't give me water. At most I'd be able to put ice chips in my mouth, to be able to taste and drink water, to be able to stand on one's own, walk on one's own, to be able to use the restroom, and to be able to actually clean yourself. Such a blessing. You know, you don't realize this until you're a mature young man and someone else has to come do this for you. You know? And I felt 23 feet. and it felt as if it just took a second to fall. And it took me so long to go up the tree, but to come down the tree just took a moment. And it's a huge lesson. When we try to advance spiritually, when we try to do some work for the sake of Allah and better ourselves, it's very difficult to go up, but it's very easy to fall. And to go up takes a lot of effort, but only one slip, one break of the branch, and all the effort can go down the drain. And that's exactly what happens to us when we sin. We pray, we fast, we read Quran, etc. We build ourselves up, build, and then one miscast glance, one wrong word said, and all that work is gone. We fall. And when we fall, falling doesn't feel easy. Falling hurts. It doesn't feel good. My teacher, Sheikh Zulfikar, he mentioned a poem that begins in English. It says, "Why do we wait until someone passes away to give them flowers?" It begins something like that. And it's interesting, why do we wait to do good and seek forgiveness and say a kind word and tell people how we feel and give flowers for when someone is dying or has passed away? We should do it while we're alive so we can totally be ones who experience the beauty of life and the beauty of such relationships. The next thing that I recall was that the power of dua. That literally I should have died, I should have been in pieces. But Allah Ta'ala took the power of dua by His will, and He made it be a surgery before the surgeons went inside. And there was an invasive surgery that fixed everything such that when the surgeons went inside, everything was taken care of. After that, there's a certain lesson that I took from my teachers, that they drove 5 hours from Chicago to come visit me. When they came to visit me, they saw me, they said salam to my family, and they turned around and they left. They spent 5 hours driving there, 5 hours, 10 hours total drive, round trip, for a 5-minute visit. And my family was offering them food, but they just said no. They said no. Why? Because this is the sunnah of the visit. One of my teachers, Muazzez, when he came, he actually saw my family, and my wife was there, so he lowered his gaze. When he lowered his gaze, he saw that she still had henna, the mendi, that coloring, that design on her hand from our walima, which was only a month ago. And he began to weep because we had just started our lives together, and now it looked like there was an impending end. And it just highlights the fact that no matter what, how many plans we plan and how many ideas we have, and
وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكَرَ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ.
Allah plans and we plan. Allah is the best of planners. And thus we might plan for this long life, Allah will end at the next moment. So we should prepare for every moment, despite the joys in life, as if we could pass away. Because that is, in essence, the reality that we may pass away. If we pass away, we want to go back to Allah Ta'ala in a way that has pleased Him. He saw that men, they realized that we had all these life plans and it could have come to an end at that moment. The next lesson, actually I took from my wife, was that, we had just gotten married. Our walima was just a month before that. And I found out later, she told me that she was making dua for me to pass away. Now this might seem funny or even mean on the surface, but she said that, you had a stomach wound, stomach ailment. And in hadith we find that a person who dies from a stomach ailment dies shaheed. So I was making dua that you die shaheed. And because if you could die shaheed, then when you pass away, you'll go to Jannah. Inshallah, you were happy with me, then I'll be with you in Jannah. SubhanAllah. She was only, at that point, 22 years old, less than 21 years old at that point, newly married. And we know the stigma in our society that if a person's married and they're divorced, that they often won't get married again. But she's willing to live that life of solitude and being alone for the sake of Jannah and Hereafter. That's what it means to have a pious wife. So when we look for a spouse, we should look for a pious spouse. My teacher, Sheikh Hussein, when he attended a gathering where they signed this card for me, in this card, and remember, if you open the card, the bottom right corner of the card, he wrote this letter. He wrote this little message that said, "Sa'ad, what good is it to receive the reward of one shaheed when you can receive the reward of 100 shuhada? Revive the sunnah and you'll receive that reward." And it was just so powerful to read that. Because in the end, that's what life's about, to revive the sunnah. To revive the way of life that will bring everyone beauty in their lives.